Welcome to the Rural Recharge, a podcast of the Florida Farm Bureau Federation. Rural Recharge is a guided conversation that allows you to cut through the noise and multitude of information out there. You should be able to trust your sources, which is why we're a platform that comes straight from the source, the farmers and ranchers growing what we eat, wear, and use every day. Our guests today are father and son, Mr. Woody Larson and his son Jacob, owners of Larson Dairy in Okeechobee, Florida. The family dairy started by Woody's father, Red Larson, in 1947 and has since grown to be nationally recognized. The farm has a rich story of sustainability, recently partnering with Brightmark Energy Inc. on a renewable natural gas project. Larsons are innovators in the Florida dairy industry, embracing technology and cutting-edge management practices. And we're grateful for their dedication to their community and look forward to digging into their story and hearing more about how they continue their family's legacy in Okeechobee. I want to thank both of you for joining us today on the Rural Recharge podcast. It's a blessing to have both folks here today. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Mr. Woody.
I'm glad to be here.
To get us started, let's do just a little bit of background. Mr. Larson, take us a little bit on through your history in the family farm.
It started actually in Florida, like in 1932. My grandfather was a diversified farmer in South Dakota.
Oh, wow.
And in 1932, they had the Dust Bowl, and they had like 7 years of crop failure, plus they had, the Great Depression. And so his father-in-law was a blacksmith, metal worker that had already moved to South Florida, and he was employed at a metal shop building pumps to drain the Everglades.
How about that?
And so that's how the family got to Florida. My dad was a small boy at the time, 8 years old. He grew up in the Depression. And he worked outside the family to help have enough money and food. When he got to be 16, he started having a few cows. He had a milk cow for the family milk, but then he just had a dream of having a dairy. And so World War II came along. He sold his little dairy. He had like 16 cows, sold his dairy and went to war. Served as a bomber pilot in World War II, and we came out in right after the war, right in 1945. Still with that dream of having a dairy farm. Amen. Worked for a year or so as a carpenter. Then he got a chance to get as a partner with a small dairy farmer, and kind of the rest of its history. I was born in 1951. They had a little dairy started at the time, he and my mother, and that was down west of Hollywood, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The milk market was all in Miami. Most of the handlers were in Miami. And so that partnership ended and another partnership took its place. And then in 1954, they moved up to Palm Beach County, and I was actually went to high school in Palm Beach County when there were a lot of dairy farms there. And then later, it looked like urban encroachment was going to run us out of Palm Beach County.
Yes, sir.
So we started locating farms over in the Okeechobee area. And that's pretty much the same story for all the dairies in South Florida. I went to college in the late 60s, early 70s, came out with a degree in dairy science, and I had it in my mind that I wanted to be part of that dairy business. And so that's kind of how I got started. I was the oldest of four children. My brother John is the youngest, and we joined our dad in Larson Dairy, and it was a story of growth. We milked cows, and when he got an opportunity to buy a few more cows or another dairy farm or something, we just grew. as the market needed the milk. We just kind of watched the market. No need to produce it if you don't have a market. And so we grew as the market grew. And as the population of Florida grew, then there was more market for milk.
Is your brother John still in the business?
Oh, yes. Yes, he is.
How about that? Jacob, how'd you end up at the dairy?
Yeah, so Travis and I both grew up in the dairy business, so to speak, or at least around dairy cows, calves, heifers, and the things that we get to do each day on a dairy farm. And it's different in the fact that it's year-round and it's 7 days a week. There really is no downtime as far as a crop having a season. Milk is always in season, especially in this market where it's a fluid market. But to answer the question, I was 16 when I felt God calling me to be a farmer, and I remember going out to lunch with my dad and grandfather on my 16th birthday, and I asked them both if they would help me get into business. I had a long way to go, but I felt the direction, I felt the calling. And over time, they both have helped me immensely achieve some of that. And so I'm very blessed to be third generation, part of the Larson legacy, and to be owner of Larson Dairy. My brother Travis is my equal partner in the business. He has the love of it also. He's not here today because we're chopping corn silage, and he's responsible for that. And it is going to be a long, hot day. And so we appreciate his work and dedication to the business. But as time went by, we both, Travis and I, went to college at the University of Florida. Both got a degree in dairy science with a minor in, we called it business resource economics, food and resource economics. And Travis actually went and worked at another large dairy in North Florida, and then returned to the family farm about the same time. It was about 2003 when we returned to the family farm. So as far as the next generation goes, the fourth generation is involved. They're all high school age, college age. So the oldest two have graduated high school. One is a state officer for FFA, and will be giving her retiring address here in just a few weeks at convention, and that's Travis's daughter, Jenna. Yep. Luke is my oldest son. He's 18 and just graduated high school. So, really unsure about where they're called or what direction they're going to go. But as far as knowing the farm and being involved in dairy, they have very much been involved. Some of it by choice and some of it not.
Now, next generation, they did pretty well at a FFA event at the national level too, didn't they, Jacob?
Yeah, and I would give kudos to Travis, my brother, and his wife, Colleen. They were the coaches for the team, but there were 3 Larson kids on that team, and they did. They won the state Florida dairy evaluation, and then went on to be the first Florida winners of the national dairy evaluation. And they depart for Scotland after the FFA convention. So we're really proud of that achievement. And again, I want to echo Travis and Colleen's work and looking into the tests and looking into what it was going to take to coach them up. Really proud of all of them.
Well, we're really proud of them too. Congratulations to the Larson family continuing on that legacy in the dairy business. But also, tell us a little bit about Okeechobee. Here we are. We're in Central Florida, South Central Florida. Mr. Larson, you talked about that. A lot of people may not know a lot about Okeechobee. Tell us what's unique about it, soil types, that kind of thing that makes it different than in other parts of the state of Florida, United States, and even the world.
Well, the Lake Okeechobee, often called the liquid heart of Florida, South Florida, is a big driver of not just the land, but everything, water. It's a big enough, large enough body of water that it actually forms its own weather sometimes.
Right.
When you get the really, really hot days, you'll get thunderstorms brew up right over the lake, and then it'll drift out over the land. In its origin, it was kind of a holding place for water, and then would seep out over the Everglades. And so A lot of man-made plumbing has changed all that.
Yes, sir.
And you still have the large Everglades agriculture area south of Lake Okeechobee, which is mostly organic soils. Those organic soils are not too much on the north side of the lake where we are in Okeechobee County, just a little bit. Maybe there's a strip about 2 miles wide of organic soils on the north side. And then we're pretty sandy. So
Yes, sir.
we're bounded on the west side of our county by the Kissimmee River, which is the main inflow into Lake Okeechobee. And Okeechobee's a big geographical barrier, if you will, okay? As we know, the population's around the coast, and if they want to go from the east coast to the west coast of Florida, they either got to go south of the lake or north of the lake. And so State Road 70 goes through downtown Okeechobee, and it's a major cross-state highway. We're getting more and more and more traffic, as we see on all of our roads.
And so it's just deep sandy soils here, kind of flat and very flat.
Well, very flat. The sand is down about 2 to 3 feet, and then you have a spodic horizon soil or hardpan soil, and that really prevents any groundwater contamination. I mean, water doesn't go down very easy. It typically runs off on the surface.
Interesting, because you don't have to go far and you can get into some really significant dense population, but here in Okeechobee County, it's not as densely populated. As you said, 70 goes across the state, and it's more cow ground out here, isn't it?
I had a guy tell me one time, the 100 miles across Highway 70, you'll see more cows than any other 100 miles in the world. And so typically beef cattle, but there's a lot of open range and places for cows to live down here.
Sir, this is a unique situation, and y'all been very helpful in regard to sustainability in the industry, ag industry, but also in taking care of Lake Okeechobee, which has been a target of many different attacks on the agricultural industry. And y'all have had a tremendous amount of benefit in helping and assisting with that. Talk to us about it. Sustainability is a buzzword today, and a lot of listeners may not realize that dairy is synonymous with it. And just a little bit about how you care for the land, including your partnership with, most recently, with Brightmark Energy Incorporated to install an anaerobic digester.
You know, it goes back about 40 years ago, and with a lot of environmental pressure because of Lake Okeechobee, and there was kind of a target on dairy farms.
Yes, sir.
Because they are a source of a lot of extra nutrients, and so we put in lagoons, we put in a lot of BMPs to prevent the runoff, and some dairy farms chose to go out of business and move out of the Lake Okeechobee Basin. So that was all part of that first wave of what I'll say regulations and trying to comply. And since then, you always get better technology. The things you learn is better and better and better. And we had gotten down to where we were just about zero runoff from our farm.
Yes, sir.
We were controlling everything on the farm. But then along came renewable natural gas, and I'll let Jacob talk about that.
Yes, sir.
Sure. Well, I'll just say that sustainability is a overused buzzword
Yes, sir.
in today's society, and it has different meanings to different folks. And so in business, a sustainable business will be profitable, and we have to be able to return a profit to compete with other things, whether that's a rising wage rate or, what inflation has done just in the last few years. We need to be able to compete, and to be truly sustainable, we have to be vibrant and profitable. If we can't be, then we'll go to the wayside like we've seen other industries. And so that is one of my concerns in this industry, as we look around and see segments of agriculture in the state of Florida that have been compromised so greatly and diminished because of a lack of profitability.
That's right.
And so For me, sustainability as a business owner is profitability. I think that all of agriculture, especially in America, thrives to seek those efficiencies that make a business more profitable. And along with those things, we have an environmental piece that we all know as farmers that we are what they say are the first environmentalists. And so whether it's water conservation, whether it's using wind power, whether it's reusing or recycling sand like we do in our freestall beds, a lot of what we do in dairy production is obviously with a cow. And so when God created the cow, he created her in nature a ruminant, which that ruminant can utilize feedstuffs or I'll say byproducts from other industries that we as human beings can't utilize directly for our sustenance or our sustainability. And so as God gave us dominion over those animals, we are to use those animals for our sustainability. And so it's amazing to me, and that's one of my passions, is to be able to take care of cows, and cows provide for us nature's most perfect food. And so that being milk and the essential wholesomeness of milk by itself, but the fact that the cow is such a large recycler. So one of our nutrition consultants told us, that a cow by herself is green. She's already doing so much for the environment and for sustainability. And he says, and I can prove it. I can tell you how many tons of these other products would go into a landfill, but yet a cow in these rations on dairy farms are converting into nature's most perfect food, which is milk. So Brightmark came along about 4.5 years ago as this whole, I'll say, technology was really becoming popular, that all of a sudden there was the ability to capture methane in cow manure. And as they could harness that gas and scrub it and clean it and convert it into a renewable natural gas, it just seemed to make a good fit. At the same time, this whole thing is heavily subsidized. It comes through California's carbon credit initiative. And so those offsets are what these folks are really after, and in this carbon market. And then, of course, there is the gas market as well. We just felt like Brightmark was the suitable fit for us to be upfront and transparent. We take care of cows, and they take the manure supply and convert it into natural gas. That's our relationship. That's our partnership. We have very little upfront investment in the technology and in the actual biogas digesters or holding cells, and Brightmark handles all that. I will tell you that they're a great company to work with. Their CEO, Bob Powell, is down to earth. He's like us. I mean, he understands farming, and he understands us pretty well, and they have done everything they said they would do. And so, this talk about net zero, we feel very good that we're leaders in that front, and we just know we're doing the right thing.
Explain just a little bit more, Jacob, on what it is. How is it captured? It's manure, and how that works, and then what's a bottom line? What does it take to sustain an operation like that, cow-wise, to make and make it valuable? Also, if you don't mind, is it profitable? Does it add to your bottom line to make you sustainable?
The manure supply is the contract really that we have with Brightmark. We're committed to supply them with manure, and we base our calculations on cows, cow numbers per head per day, so to speak. And there is a size that works for efficiency. A very small farm, like a 200 cow dairy, can't do what we're doing. Right. It just doesn't make the efficiencies. And so when you talk about putting out this much capital investment and infrastructure, it really needs somewhere around 1,800 cows and up, which we'll talk about that in a little bit, because when we look at dairy support programs, the average size dairy in the nation now is like 320 to 350 cows, somewhere in there. So the average size farm, this program doesn't make sense, but there's other things that do make sense for them. And so there is some economic incentive to us, and we base it on a per head basis. We basically have a line in our, what we call our sand lane, where Larson Dairy is responsible for getting the manure to that point, and Brightmark takes it from there.
There you go. Well, it's we talk about sustainability, but you've chosen, even when 40 years ago, Mr. Larson, where things were tough and there was a target on the dairy industry here in Okeechobee County, and y'all have chosen to stay, and that took change. And this is another thing that you've done to change and adapt in order to make it economical as well as environmental and ecologically sound to continue in this industry. And I tell you what, that's an admirable thing to do and have been successful with. But also, I think a lot of folks recognize that and have, you've received several different recognitions for that, whether it be the Commissioner of Agriculture's Environmental Stewardship Award, or even the County Alliance for Responsible Environmental Stewardship by Florida Farm Bureau, different things that you have done and to accomplish. And you mentioned one of those was BMPs a little while ago, which is Best Management Practices. Can you tell us, our listening audience, just a little bit more about best management practices and what that entails?
Well, first of all, what you say is true. I mean, some folks chose to go out of business or move out of the area. And so just to give you some numbers, back 40 years ago, in the middle 80s, there were 51 dairies in the Okeechobee area, either in Okeechobee County or immediately surrounding, and about an average of 1,000 cows, so around 50,000 cows. Today, that number is down to about 10 or 12 dairy farms, and the cow numbers are down in less than half of that, about 20,000 total. Now, that's not us, but that's all of our neighbors and so forth. But the increase in efficiency, we're actually producing more milk with those 20,000 cows than the area did with the 50,000 cows. So that's one of the big keys right there, is you're producing more with less. And that's always the challenge of agriculture. It doesn't matter what you're growing. You just produce more with less. In terms of BMPs, simple things like preventing runoff, putting in, and these BMPs work for beef cattle as well, and pasture areas and so forth. The whole idea is you don't want the rainwater, especially after a big rain, you don't want that rainwater leaving your farm too fast. If there's ways to retain it, hold it back, there's a whole manual of BMPs, both for beef cattle and for dairy cattle. And so there's a lot of different ideas about, and if you think about it, it's all common sense. Gravity still works. It still runs downhill.
Amen.
And so if you just slow it down, it gives it a chance to sink into the soil and be retained.
Well, very good. Now, Jacob, you've done a lot of different things too. I'd just say you've worn a lot of hats. And, you and I grew close, especially as we served on the Florida Farm Bureau Board of Directors together. And but you had to get off of that just because you're spread so thin, doing so many different things. You're the chairman, president of Southeastern Milk, and you've got some other responsibilities too. Tell us a little bit about that and why that's so important.
Jeb, first of all, I'll say that I cherish the decade I spent on Florida Farm Bureau Board.
Amen.
Very enlightening to me. Got a really good education, and I think was able to have some input on some of what helped Florida Farm Bureau, and we've been very blessed in that capacity. It is true that I was very humbled and honored to be elected by dairy farmer peers that own Southeast Milk to be their president. I'm in my third year as president, and it's been very challenging. The first 2 years were really tough as we were going through more or less a reorganization. A large amount of the milk that we had as members had left us to go to another cooperative. And we really struggled to right size Southeast milk. And so God has been good. We've overed a lot of that, and we're headed in the right direction as a cooperative. That being said, in the Southeast, we have faced many challenges in the fact that this is a fluid milk market. You don't have a lot of processing in the Southeast for manufactured products, which are mostly class 2, 3, or 4 products. Class 1 is what we call fluid milk, milk for drinking. And so that population growth that we were talking about earlier in Florida, we have more and more people moving to Florida each day. Now, not all of them are milk drinkers,
That's right.
but over 90% of them have milk in the refrigerator. So that's really something that I'm proud of, that dairy is such a staple in the home. And so we know that milk consumption per capita has decreased, and it has done that for generations now, that the per capita consumption of milk has decreased. Some of our friends in the citrus industry would say the same thing with juice. And that water, if you could have told me 25 years ago that bottled water would be our number one competitor for fluid space in the human diet, I would have scoffed at that. Right. But it's true. I mean, water is a highly consumed fluid beverage, and it competes for stomach space with everything else. But having the passion for the nutritional value of milk is one of the things that we still really thrive on. And as farmers in Southeast Milk, the cooperative system is to work together to balance the market and serve the market. And so something that has changed over time, and Dad can talk better about it than I can, but where the milk plants were located and why the farms are where they are.
Right.
And then the federal order system in general was designed to ensure that the processors had fresh local milk, right, so that they could run their milk plants. And so agriculture is a lot about attrition and consolidation, as we see our friends in the Midwest get really, really big in row crop, the guys producing the corn and soybeans. And we see the feedlots and where they're congregated in the country where feed is the cheapest. And right, so feed is the most expensive here. And feed is our number one cost of operating a dairy farm. And so there's some sayings amongst our farmers. One of them is it's cost to produce plus freight. And so if a farmer can produce the milk cheaper somewhere else, and it's cheaper to send the fluid milk to that market, then that local milk gets displaced, or it doesn't need to be there. Mm-hmm. That's true in a sense, except you need high quality. And milk is very perishable. It has a short shelf life. Milk that's produced today at our farms should be on the grocery store shelf probably by Thursday, possibly even tomorrow. And most of those shelf lives are 20 to 22 days, somewhere in there. I will say that the Southeast has really increased its parameters for quality. There is a lot of high quality milk produced in the Southeast, and of course we're in Florida. But Dad, why don't you talk a little bit about the market, or where the milk plants were, where they are today, and maybe where they're headed?
You mentioned the federal marketing orders, and why is the federal government even involved in the marketing of milk? And if you think about the Department of Agriculture, and they're thinking about feeding the population of the United States, milk is one of those considered necessary ingredients, and necessary to your diet, necessary Amen. To school lunch programs, and necessary to cooking. When you think about how many recipes use fluid milk, you just can't get that anywhere else. Amen. Now, typically, dairy farms were located close to where the people were. That's why the dairy farms were located close to Miami. They were close to the metropolitan areas. There was another large group of dairy farms around Tampa, some around Orlando, quite a few around Jacksonville, and a few around Tallahassee. When you think about it, that was where it was in Florida. As the technology changed and the marketing changed, I mentioned urban encroachment earlier. Demand for land for people to build houses on and so forth kind of pushed the dairy farms further away from the metropolitan areas. But we were able to improve the cooling and the transportation on our farms and able to produce good quality milk and ship it, 150 miles to Miami instead of being only 30 miles away. So a lot of changes happened, and that's kind of how the market's changed. Used to, when I was a boy, you walked down the aisle and you either bought orange juice or milk, or maybe you'd buy a packet of Gatorade that you'd mix with water out of your faucet at home.
You didn't buy water.
Or Kool-Aid or something. No, we didn't buy water for sure.
But it's interesting too, because this is like any kind of agricultural product, though. You've got production as just one facet. Then you've got packaging or processing, and then you have distribution. And I can tell you that those all have to work harmoniously, and they have to work, and especially in regard to time and perishable commodities, to make it work and get it to the consuming public as soon as possible.
The best example of that is when you have market disruption, like with a hurricane.
Yes, sir.
When you have perishable products like milk, and something people are used to going to the store a couple times a week to buy milk, and you have a hurricane come in and change all that, people need it and they want it. They want it pretty bad.
Yes, sir.
Jeb, back on the cooperative question, Southeast Milk holds the contracts with these fluid handlers, we call them, or bottling plants. There's two big ones down in Miami. So most of the milk that we produce here in Okeechobee area goes south to Miami, which is about 125 miles on average. And so you think about the state of Florida, the geography of it being a peninsula. We're not an island, but we are different than anywhere else in the country in the fact that we have ports on each side, but most of our food is coming in.
That's right. Yes.
By interstate system, road system, some on rail, which we get most of our grain and things on rail. That's right. As Southeast Milk owns the transportation division, so we do have tankers and tractors and a fleet of trucks that help move that milk to our customers to ensure that our customers have milk to bottle. And so that's all been a big challenge for me as I've been the president, but we've hired a really good CEO, and he's put together a great team. A lot of that team used to work for us, and so it's kind of like putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. And it's good. It's going in the right direction. The federal order system has been in need of overhaul for quite some time. Secretary Vilsack said it was modernization is what he wanted, and he wanted consensus. And so over 2 years ago, a meeting was hosted in Kansas City. Florida Farm Bureau was very instrumental in sending 8 dairy farmers from the state of Florida to that meeting. And the people in attendance, there was about 200 people there, and they couldn't believe that Florida had so much representation. And they got their eyes open to realize that, hey, this is about fluid milk. The federal order system is about fluid milk and ensuring those processors have milk. So we're looking for a recommended decision by USDA to come out in July, which it can't get here soon enough. We've been waiting on it a long time. But there's a couple of things that will be beneficial to dairies in Florida. And so for the Southeast, we're looking for meaningful change there, and that will have an impact on our producers here in the state of Florida. So we've got some things that are out there that are going to give dairy farmers either the ability to plan for the future, staying in dairy and continuing on that track, or maybe to say, hey, we pivot and do something else.
Sustainability.
Yes.
And that's it.
Absolutely.
And I can tell you what, Jacob, there was no doubt that Florida's representation in Kansas City had a huge impact nationally and for Florida especially. But what a blessing it was to have you all there to make a difference. Tell us a little bit about the co-op too. How many members are there in the co-op? Where are they? How far are they across the state?
The cooperative has about 120 dairy farmer members, owner members. Around 28 of those are organic farmers. We have one organic farmer in Florida, a couple in Georgia, a couple in Alabama, but most of them are towards Louisiana, Mississippi area. We have one customer that is the primary reason we have organic production in the Southeast. That customer is Publix.
Oh, wow.
So all of Publix organic brand in their stores is produced by our membership, Southeast Milk. The conventional side, which is what I call the red top, I'm a whole milk fan, a whole milk drinker, and
Amen.
And I'll just use this time on the air to clarify any myth out there. But whole milk is 3.25% fat.
Preach.
Okay, and a lot of people in public or even in my church think, oh, that's all fat. And I said, no, ma'am, that's 3.25% fat. But I'm a big whole milk fan, and Southeast Milk has the contracts with Publix. They have 3 bottling plants. 2 of them are in Florida. One of them is just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And so our farmer membership is basically spread throughout that geography. Publix is a great customer of ours. We have several others that are great customers that do a lot of school milk, institutional milk, private label packaging, co-packing. And so obviously a big focus is your product, but also your consumer and who's purchasing that. So in that case, for us, it's our customers, the different contracts that we have with our customers. So
I think it's very helpful to know for folks to know, and then they can support it too. I think that's an important thing. But also, Jacob, you're the president of Southeastern Milk Incorporated and the co-op, but also you're on the United Dairy Farmers of Florida as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
United Dairy Farmers of Florida was created kind of as a spinoff from Southeast Milk's Governmental Affairs Committee, which Ray Hodge was that employee for a long, long time. Ray Hodge is the executive director of United Dairy Farmers of Florida, and I just happen to be the president of it currently. I will say it is the legislative arm for Florida legislative affairs, we'll say, for dairy. We have several lobbyists and consultants that work for us, but it is funded by all of the dairy farmers in Florida primarily. So we've worked hard to contribute and have a voice for Florida dairy farmers, so to speak, as United Dairy Farmers of Florida, to work on really dairy-specific asks. And Ray Hodge is that executive director.
As I said, you wear a lot of hats, and I can tell you what, you're a very busy person, but I think the industry is grateful to have a Larson in that position, especially you, Jacob. You're always extremely engaged, but also very tactful and strategic. And Mr. Larson, you raised a fine young man. That's all I got to say. We've been a pleasure to know and get to know Jacob, especially in his leadership. He's an outstanding leader, and you can tell, especially in dairy in the state of Florida. What's the most encouraging thing that you see in the dairy industry?
I've mentioned some on the federal order reform. Right. That's been a long time building. So for my fellow dairy farmers in Southeast Milk, but my fellow dairy farmers everywhere in the Southeast, hang in there, and that hopefully that meaningful change is coming, and hopefully we'll have a recommended decision that's favorable here in just a few months. I'll say that here in the state of Florida, I'm encouraged by this Commissioner of Agriculture that we have. Some of the folks in leadership, I feel, are doing the right thing to help preserve some of our rural ways of life. And I'll say some of these conservation easements are protecting land for the long haul. And I think that even dairy, when we look at dairy's contribution to food value and to sustainability for food and nourishment, dairy needs to be considered for some of those programs as well. because it's not very hard to look at the investment that dairy farmers make capital-wise, and then the return on their assets, and realize, hey, this is a lot of work to do this. So as the commissioner and others, and there's several different programs now, but I applaud their efforts, and I'm encouraged by them, because as I see them start to consider some of the more intensive uses of the land to produce food for our local sustainability here, I'm encouraged by that. That's a good thing.
Very well said. Mr. Larson, anything you'd like to add?
Well, as you get older, you have a different perspective. So
Sure.
I'm looking back at a lot of the changes that I've seen. And your question is about what's encouragement, what do we have to look forward to? So I have the blessing of seeing a lot of changes in our family. I've seen Travis and Jacob come on to take the reins in this business and own most of the business now. And I see their children coming on. So those things for me are a bright future. And I do enjoy the family part.
I can say that probably goes into my next question, the why. Why do you stay in the dairy business? I tell you, faith, family, farm is generally what drives me, and I think that drives a Larson family too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a lot of it. This is not an industry for somebody that's looking to get real wealthy. This is an industry about passion.
Amen.
And everybody's called for different reasons, but you have to have a lot of passion to want to do this. And I was asked the other day, a very intelligent man asked me, he says, how do you protect and preserve and keep that legacy going? And what is it about your children that will be different than the rest of society's children the same age that'll make them want to do that?
Amen.
And I said, I can't answer that question for them. Proverbs tells us to raise them in the way they ought to go, and they ought to direct their path. And so I've encouraged all three of my children to seek the Lord's will. And if he's calling you to do something, just do it, and you'll be blessed. If that's farming, it's farming. If it's something else, it's something else. But that part of faith, like you said, Jeb, it runs deep in our legacy here. I mean, we just need to be obedient to the Lord.
Amen and amen to that. Absolutely. Is there one thing that you'd like to leave with our listeners today? And if that is one thing, what would it be?
Well, I just always thank you for listening. I've been involved in Florida agriculture for a long time, mostly in the dairy side, but always trying to speak up for agriculture.
Amen.
So just hang in there. People have to eat.
Amen.
And so if there's one thing, I just say you got to eat.
Amen. Jacob, what one last thing you'd like to leave?
Jeb, June is National Dairy Month. I would just say raise a glass of milk in honor of your Florida dairy farmers, and we really appreciate the time that we've had today to discuss this. Grateful for the opportunity.
Make that a red top one, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for what you do. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for being a blessing and inspiration, as well as just a tremendous leadership in our Florida agriculture. I love you. Thank y'all for joining me and joining this listening audience. May God bless you as you continue to seek and serve him.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for supporting the Rural Recharge podcast. We hope that you're enjoying these conversations brought to you by farmers for our neighbors. While you're here, please consider giving us a rating or review. It really helps us to continue to share the story of our Florida farm families and their important impact on our local communities. Thank you.